Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Leading off tonight, what really happened? We are now hearing two new versions of what happened the night Trayvon Martin was killed. First, George Zimmerman's brother told CNN that George was nearly unconscious and in danger of brain damage when he shot Trayvon. We've also been told that that brother hadn't spoken to George Zimmerman in years and may not have talked to him since the shooting. So we don't know the source of his information. Then a new eyewitness come out here who's described a fight between two men that night, one on top of the other, and an Hispanic man seemingly uninjured walking away from the scene. Well, we'll try to untangle this unfolding story at the top of the program tonight. Also, those stand your ground laws, like the one in Florida that George Zimmerman's attorney has said may be applicable in this case. They're in force in roughly 24 states now in this country. We have some compelling audio, by the way, of someone who left this house to shoot to death two unarmed men who had broken into a neighbor's house. The shooter used the stand your ground law in his defense. Plus, there's an old saying in politics as well as in baseball, don't believe what you see in March, meaning don't get too excited about how well someone plays in spring training. Well, it's only March now in politics, but we have another poll, this one in Wisconsin, showing President Obama pulling away in double digits from Mitt Romney. But we also know the far more important month in, well, it's politics, is October, the eve of the election itself. And the DNC is having great fun lashing Mitt Romney to Paul Ryan and his new budget plan, which Democrats insist favors the rich.
When old Mitt claps his hands for the Paul Ryan plan, that's amore.
That's amore, and that's in the sideshow. And let me finish tonight with the excruciating, unpredictable election that's coming our way this summer and fall. We begin with the Trayvon Martin shooting. Michael Isikoff is NBC's chief investigative correspondent. He joins us from Sanford, Florida tonight. Also, David Wilson is managing editor of thegrio.com. Thank you, gentlemen, both. Let's start with Michael, who's new on the case. Michael, what can you tell us that you've been able to uncover?
Well, look, Chris, there's still a lot murky about what happened that night between Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. But one new piece of evidence that we did find today that's could raise some further questions is the original 2005 police report on the arrest of George Zimmerman. Zimmerman was arrested at a bar near the University of Central Florida by a state law enforcement officer and charged with battery and use of violence and obstructing justice. When you look at the underlying police report, what we find is Zimmerman disobeyed the orders of a state law enforcement officer to back off. He was in the process of arresting some employees at the bar. They got into a scuffle. Zimmerman, when the officer showed his badge, Zimmerman shot back, I don't care who you are, and then F you. That's in the police report, Zimmerman talking to the state police officer, and then it says they got into a short scuffle. So here we have a history of a physical altercation between Zimmerman and a law enforcement officer, Zimmerman disobeying what the law enforcement officer told him to do, and he could have been charged with a felony. We spoke to the prosecutor on this case, said this could have been a battery charge of felony, but a junior prosecutor in the office did reduce the charges to misdemeanor. The court ordered it dismissed it under a court-ordered diversion program, and what could have led to a felony conviction of Zimmerman was instead reduced and taken off his record. Why was it?
First of all, let's get it straight. Apparently, he was 21 years old at the time, by my calculation. He's 28 now. 21 at the time. He was involved in getting drinks or alcoholic beverages for someone below age. Is that what the issue began with?
No, actually, it began with him interfering with the law, with the liquor control agent. The underlying case, the case that the liquor control officer was investigating, was sale of liquor to underage drinkers. Zimmerman is friends with one of those who's being charged. It was being one of the bar employees being charged. He interferes with the arrest. He's told to back off. He refuses to do so, and then they get into the scuffle. Look, this doesn't resolve any of the questions about what happened that night between Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, but in the larger battle and larger effort to understand both of the two principles in this case, this prior police report does shed some light.
Does it shed light on whether he should be allowed to carry a concealed weapon, a gun?
Actually, I think some people will draw that as the most important lesson or point out of all this. Florida is one of those states that has a concealed weapons law permit law. It was that permit that allowed Zimmerman to be carrying that 9mm semi-automatic handgun the night that he shot Trayvon Martin. You can have one of those permits if you're arrested, but you can not if you're convicted of a felony. It's only the felony conviction that is a bar to carrying a permit, and because the felony charges against Zimmerman were reduced, the rest is history. He was able to get the permit.
Well, let's bring David Wilson of Griot in here. I want to show you something, gentlemen. But let's take a look at this. The brother of George Zimmerman came to his defense last night on CNN, and although Robert Zimmerman Jr. did not specifically say he'd spoken to his brother George since the shooting, he did describe the moments leading up to Trayvon Martin's death, according to whatever source. We don't know what it is, but let's watch him.
George was out of breath. He was barely conscious. His last thing he remembers doing was moving his head from the concrete to the grass so that if he was banged one more time, he wouldn't be, wearing diapers for the rest of his life and being spoon-fed by his brother. And there would have been George dead.
Well, subsequent to that, George Zimmerman's lawyer, and that's the lawyer for Zimmerman himself, told NBC the brothers, those two, Robert and George, have not spoken in years, and that the comments by the brother Robert are totally irrelevant. That's according to the defense attorney, or the attorney for George Zimmerman. Let me bring David in. How do you put all this together? We have people coming out of the woodwork on both sides there, and this guy on the side of Zimmerman. We don't know where his source of information. I guess we could assume he talked to the father, or if he didn't talk to the brother.
It appears that he and his father have a similar story. And, what's interesting about their story is that it is sort of, they're painting a life and death situation for George Zimmerman, that this was something that he had to act, that he had to do something. I thought what was also interesting about both of their statements was the fact that they say that Trayvon Martin was reaching for the gun. And this is new information that we obviously didn't hear last week. And I think it's just creating this sort of this story that, look, he had to act. But when you look at the police tape, that video that came out, again, it creates some difficulty for the Zimmerman camp because, again, he looks like someone who, just walked off the street. It doesn't look like he's in any sort of distress or physical distress. There isn't any sort of physical or any bruising that you can see clearly. So I think
well, what about the close-up done by another network that looked at the back of his head and you could see cuts in the back of his head as he described in his testimony?
But, again, his brother said that he was sort of beaten inches away from being unconscious. And here you see this guy getting out of the police vehicle rather easily and walking on his own volition. So I think, again, this video creates a problem for the Zimmerman side.
Well, let's take a look at an interview in Orlando Fox, Channel 35, Wednesday. George Zimmerman's father, Robert Sr., described the fight between the two men on the sidewalk, as he put it. Let's watch that.
After nearly a minute of being beaten, George was trying to get his head off of the concrete, trying to move with Trayvon on him into the grass. In doing so, his firearm was shown. Trayvon Martin said something to the effect of, "You're going to die now, or you're going to die tonight," something to that effect.
Then last night on CNN, an unidentified witness who did not wish to identify her, he or she, they didn't even make the gender clear, called that account into question by placing the fight between Trayvon and Zimmerman on the lawn on grass. Because it was dark, the witness said he, I'm not sure it's a he or she, could not see which man was on top of the other, but did recount what he or she saw immediately following the shooting. Let's listen to this report.
Then he was walking towards where I was watching, and I could see him a little bit clearer and see that it was a Hispanic man, and he was, he didn't appear hurt or anything else.
Michael, this got back to you, sir. This has become the battle of sourcing, some of it secondhand, some of it perhaps derived from hearing it someone else on television or on radio or listening to this. This case, what can you figure out down there about the progress of the case itself? Anything is all in the hands now of the state's attorney from Brevard County, we understand. It's not a federal case exactly. It's still a state matter primarily.
Right. I talked to the Justice Department today. They're overseeing it, taking a look at it, but the investigation is being done by state investigators with a state prosecutor in charge. Look, the evidence is as murky as it can get. Clearly, one witness, one crucial witness, Trayvon Martin, is dead. You have George Zimmerman, and there may or may not have been good eyewitnesses who can back up or dispute some of what he saw. It is worth pointing out that there are two sort of known facts that people on both sides could point to here. One is that we know that George Zimmerman did disobey the instructions from the 911 officer not to keep following Trayvon Martin around, and that's perhaps why this police report from 2005 might be relevant. But we also know from the original police report on this incident in February that the police officer on the scene did report that that Zimmerman had was bleeding from the nose and had blood on his body. So that's a contemporaneous account by a police officer that suggests that that strongly suggests there was a physical struggle between Martin and Zimmerman. How it began and exactly what happened, we may never know.
Well, this stand your ground law down in Florida and a number of other states, David, is going to be an issue. It seems to me we're stuck here now deciding what the law says. I mean, the moral issues here are complicated as hell. But, David, it does seem to me we got a challenge on our hands now. What constitutes self-defense under this new statute?
Yeah, I mean, it's very murky, right? I mean, you have two people, right? And oftentimes, if you have one person is going against the word of a dead man, and I think that's
the case in any murder case. Well, let's be honest.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, there's some other things that you can sort of judge by. If you can say, I can easily say that someone came up to me and I decided to shoot them without any sort of, you don't have to take anything else into account. I think that's a problem. And so I think you now you're starting to see this law being applied to some other cases. We were just talking today in my newsroom about a case in Miami where one gang-related incident where a guy shot up a car with other gang members in it and he was protected under the stand your ground law. Yeah. So I think that we're going to have to take another look at this law. I know a lot of folks on the right, and particularly those who are for gun rights, are not going to be comfortable with this debate, but I think it's one that we need to have.
We're going to have it coming up in about 1 minute. Michael Isikoff and David Wilson, thanks both of you gentlemen. That fight's coming up here. The Trayvon case, the Trayvon Martin case, has shined a spotlight on these so-called stand your ground laws. We're going to talk about them right now. We've got an incredible, by the way, 911 tape of a man who left his house. This is another case to shoot and kill two burglars at a neighbor's house and use the stand your ground law as a defense. Well, this is Hardball.